And welcome back to Open Your Eyes. Once again, we do say to you, Happy New Year, as we're kicking things off in a big way. As a matter of fact, in with us for this morning, we've got representatives of the Belize Peace Movement on conversation, an update actually on the redistricting case. In with us is Paco Smith, who is a Belize Peace Movement in the Claimant case, and Major Lloyd Jones, who is a part of Belize Peace Movement as well. Guys, good morning and welcome. Happy New Year.
Good morning.
Thank you very much.
And you know, it's always good to start the new way in a big way, the best way possible. And this is definitely a way to start it here when it comes to good conversations. Now, let's to get people on understand on where the situation is. Let's go back to where it came from. So we're doing this update on the Belize Peace Movement and their redistricting case. Where did that come from? Let's go there.
Okay, let me start then. Well, actually, as you know, the Belize Peace Movement came about as a result of this ICJ referendum, and a group of like-minded Belizeans got together and we decided that we were going to put some effort into opposing that referendum because it was a one-sided affair. After that referendum, well, we asked ourselves, what next? And so we committed ourselves to three main objectives. The first is good governance. The second is to fight corruption. And the third is to promote all those things that are good for the development of Belize. And then we said, look, there's an election coming up. There's a huge imbalance in terms of political power in this country. And perhaps that ought to be our next challenge. And so we decided that we're going to go after that. And part of the problem is that the Constitution requires that the Elections and Boundaries Commission revisit every so often the political divisions, and that they have an obligation under the Constitution to look at those divisions and where they find an imbalance to correct that imbalance, that the division should be nearly as equal as possible. And currently that is not the case. And so they clearly have no intention of correcting that. And so we said, well, we'll have to go to the court and ask the court to look at it, and if the court agrees with us, to instruct them to correct that imbalance.
You did in fact attempt to explore other avenues before taking it to the court. You wrote to the Elections and Boundaries Commission, right? Tell us about that. What was the response you got? How long ago you contacted them?
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Brother Morgan, Paul Morgan, wrote to them several years ago to say that there's this imbalance, point them to the Constitution and say, can you please correct it? They did nothing. And then the Belize Peace Movement also wrote to them. We got absolutely no response from them. They simply ignored the letter and pretend as if though we didn't write. And so the only other recourse is to go to the court and ask the court to please examine this issue.
We saw the re-registration exercise conducted, and I think before that process was initiated, many had assumed that it would have been the best time to be able to do both a re-registration, a registration of new voters, as well as a redistricting. But that never happened. And I think it perhaps, because the registration was done, it fell off, and you guys have brought it back as an important issue, because it is. And so I wanted to talk about what the Constitution actually says about how the country should be divided based on electoral divisions.
Well, I think that Major Jones pretty much summed it up. The Constitution speaks to having the divisions as equal as possible, right? We know that we don't live in an ideal world, but all the same, when you have gross imbalances, for example, with certain constituencies that have upwards to 6,000 plus electors versus constituencies which have about 1,500, that's a gross imbalance. And it's, as you said, rightfully, that's something that needs to be addressed.
Now, what I'm trying to get at is so our viewers can be able to understand exactly what the letter of the law says, because what you are saying is basically just enforce what exists. And so there is a specific amount of electoral divisions that should be had, and as you said, what the Constitution says is basically it should be as equal as possible. We have specific examples. In Belize City, for example, we have divisions that are about 1,000 people. And when we compare that to some of the divisions outside of Belize City, you're looking at some with as much as 6,000, 7,000, right?
Yeah. Well, you see, the Constitution, I think when we went to independence, the Constitution said that the number of seats or divisions shall not be less than 28.
28.
But it was amended to say the number of seats shall be 31. So now we have a problem because of the imbalance, you can't, unless the House approves, you can't, and currently the UDP does not have the constitutional majority to change the Constitution. So it would require a bipartisan effort to change it from 31 to whatever. Right? But the Constitution says the number of seats shall be 31. What that means now that if you redistrict, Belize City will lose some seats because you can't go to 32 and 35 and so, right? And I think that's the problem. Belize City has for a very long time have a monopoly, if you will, on political power, right? And to the detriment, of course, to the rest of the country. So when we look, for example, at the smallest division is Fort George, which is a PUP seat. And as you know, I am a supporter of the People's United Party. And some people have tried and are trying to make this into a political issue. It is not a political issue. The Belize Peace Movement is not a political organization. I am a member of the PUP and I am a member of the Belize Peace Movement. And I don't think it has to be one or the other, right? Because if I have to choose, then it means that my party is not for good governance, it is not for fighting corruption, etc., right? So it is not a political issue. And the imbalance exists in both UDP divisions, control divisions, and PUP control divisions. So I think it must be made clear to Belizean people that this is not what that is about, all right? But it is about an imbalance of power, and it is about fair play. So what happens now is in a small division, for example, I am registered in Belize Rural Central, 5,915 voters, compared to Fort George, which is 1,536 voters. So it takes almost 4 of us in Rural Central to make 1 in Fort George. How is that fair? This is the kind of imbalance and unfairness that the Constitution is trying to prevent. And so the impetus, therefore, is on the Elections and Boundaries Commission to correct it. Now, the trick here, of course, is that the Elections and Boundaries Commission will recommend to Parliament, and it is for Parliament now to take that recommendation and approve it. You see? But they have not even begun to the exercise. Now, you will recall that when we were pressing for re-registration, it was before the municipal elections. The Prime Minister said that the time was too short. It was about 8 months. I said, oh, we have a municipal election coming up. We can't redistrict. The time is too short, so we'll do it after the municipal elections. But then the Elections and Boundaries Commission then recommended that we first redistrict, then re-register. No, that like you put on your pants and then you put on your underwear after, man, you know, works up. Right?
Well, I mean, if we clearly define re-registration was going back to seeing who the voters are, where they are, and who's eligible for whatever space they live. So now that we do have that data, in terms of logical sequences, it is a good time to go back and say all these people have been confirmed in 2019 to be in these areas, and now we could look at ensuring that their the electoral divisions in the country are more fair, as you said. But you mentioned a very critical point. While we've heard you mention a few times the Elections and Boundaries Commission, they're not necessarily the ones who will decide whether or not a redistricting exercise will take place. What is the process as stipulated by the law?
Okay, well, for the lack of a better description, the Elections and Boundaries Commission is the body that's vested with putting forward to the government what needs to be done. If there's no political will to have it done, there you find yourselves in where we are right now, sort of an impasse, so to speak, where we know that intuitively these things need to be done, but whereby where the authority lies, it isn't being done. And I think that fundamentally it rests with the seated government, the government of the day that is empowered with the authority to put forth these type of measures.
So if you guys are successful in this case, what then? What happens next? And if you're not successful, would the Belize Peace Movement find another way or another avenue of, I don't want to say attack the government, but try to correct the imbalances around?
Well, definitely. We feel very positive about our case. In terms of our effort, in terms of our intentions, it's clear that the law says that this needs to be done. One of the things, as Major Jones said, is that the Belize Peace Movement is about good governance. And one of the fundamental tenets of good governance is that there is adherence to the rule of law. In the case, and we like to talk very, very positively, in the case that we are unsuccessful, well, there's always the room for appeal and things of that nature. But definitely our resolve is strong to ensure that those who are vested with the responsibility of ensuring that that which is right under the law are held accountable. So we shall leave no stone unturned in terms of whatever avenues we must take in order to correct what needs to be done.
And you know, and this speaks to, I think, to a very important issue for us as a people.
Excuse me.
That our political leaders continue to show disregard for the Constitution. They so casually brush it aside. The Constitution forbids us to give citizenship to Guatemalans. The politicians, for their own political purposes, grant citizenship. The Constitution requires that these divisions be balanced. They ignore it. We have to make the Belizean people understand that it is our duty as citizens to hold our elected officials accountable. And if we can't respect the Constitution, which is the highest law in the country, do you understand how this can lead to anarchy? Because if our political leaders can so casually ignore the Constitution, then what can you expect of them down the road? So it starts there. I also want the Belizean people to understand, and particularly those who are in divisions outside of Belize City, to understand what this means in practical terms.
Yes.
The Prime Minister announced that he was giving $1 million, he was making available $1 million for Christmas cheer. $40,000 for UDP control divisions and $20,000 for PUP control divisions. That itself shows you the kind of mentality that we have, because all these people are elected by the Belizean people, right? So it shows you right off the bat they start off with that imbalance, right? But put that aside. If you look at the Albert division, 2,208 voters, if memory serves me correct, gets $40,000 for Christmas cheer. You go to Cayo Central, controlled by Rene Montero. He has almost 7,000 voters. He only got 40,000 too. So 2,000 people, 2,200 get 40,000, 7,000 get 40,000, right? So if you divide that, the people in Cayo got less than the people in Albert. How is that fair to the people in Cayo Central? You see? So in practical terms, it disadvantaged the average voter. And I think the Constitution was trying to avoid this very thing, that your vote, your political power is less than mine. So they say, look, try and balance it as much. And the Constitution goes on to say, look, when you read division, or when you carve out these divisions, bear in mind the rural areas and the logistics and the distances between villages, etc., etc., right? Yes. So you have to take all of that into consideration when you make a division. That's all the Constitution requires, right? And all people, and it's a very simple exercise to me, that the elections and boundaries could not or cannot find it in themselves on their own to do what is right. That we now have to go to court and ask the court to please look at it and in effect ask for a writ of mandamus, force them to do their job.
Yeah. Now, the time of this particular case is an interesting one. We're in 2020. There is supposed to be an election by the end of this year, a general election at the end of the year, any person looking on may say, listen, you know, the groundwork has already gone in the campaigns. It's highly unlikely that any administration would want to go through this exercise at this point in time. Do you feel that that's part of the hesitation that we've experienced in getting to the redistricting? Absolutely not, because government has had an opportunity to do this from whenever they've been in government. Yeah. Right? So in terms of the timing, it is what it is. Unfortunately, I don't like to quote politicians, but one of them says that quite a bit. And the situation is that they're not adhering to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Whether it be 1 month, 1 year, or what have you. The Constitution is the Constitution. Mm-hmm. As Major Jones rightfully said, with regards to the Belize Peace Movement, you know, we're grounded in fostering good governance. And some of the hallmarks of good governance are accountability, transparency, and meaningful participation. And those are three things that he just outlined that are lacking with regards to the governance in this nation. Mm-hmm. And it's incumbent upon civil society to back the burden, mm-hmm. to be that medicine that is necessary. Mm-hmm. Because, trust me, those in positions of authority know precisely what needs to be done. They have known for quite some time. But if the people do not hold them accountable, then they'll just continue on with the status quo. So that's the grounding on which we put forward this case.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't, again, if you go back to the re-registration exercise, the politicians always want to do what's best for them, even to the detriment of the Constitution and even to the detriment of the Belizean people. When we were supposed to re-register, the Prime Minister pushed it back till after the municipal elections. He said 8 months was too short a time to re-register before the election. When we were to go to referendum, 9 months before the referendum, we conducted the re-registration exercise. 9 months was not too long, or too short, sorry, to conduct a re-registration exercise for the most important vote in the history of this country. You see, they are concerned about political power, not what is right. And unless we as people keep them in check, they are going to get out of control. Yeah. The government knows, obviously the people at the elections and boundaries know that this is required because they wanted to do it before re-registration. And the PUP at the time said, no, this can't be correct, right? So they know that it needs to be done, but it is not politically expedient for them. And I think we can't allow them to brush the Constitution aside and say, well, it's not convenient for us at this time. Make we go to elections first and then after we and do it. So that can't be correct.
So what we have on the screen here is actually a map that shows the different electoral divisions. It's pretty interesting to look at as well, because you see where electorally we are divided in the country, and to the far right you see what would be Belize City. Belize City has, or the Belize district itself has about what, 13 representatives. 13 out of the 31. Right,
so that's a huge political imbalance. It is an unfair representation in the House. So for example, it is as if myself get to elect somebody in the House, Paco get to elect somebody in the House, and then all of you in this room only choose one. Naturally we say, hang on, that doesn't sound correct to me, right? Why you a Paco and get one each and then all we have to share one, right? And that is the problem that we're having. And again, it goes back to, these are all colonial issues where Belize City was the epicenter, and then we still haven't gotten rid of it, and then no political party wants to do it. Because if you look, for example, in Belize City, the PUP control 4 seats, right? So Fort George, right, which is the smallest,
Caribbean Shores,
and then Caribbean Shores and so on. But if you talk about redistricting, they're thinking, well, I will lose this seat. Right? The UDP is saying also, if we redistrict, then we will lose the seat, which is quote unquote a sure seat. So nobody wants to touch it. They rather just keep it that way, again, to the detriment of the Constitution. So we can't allow this to happen, right?
You know, and this is where the problem lies in our country, because I'll tell you what, we've got the Belize Peace Movement, and you guys are actually trying to get these things into places that they're supposed to. But I think one of the things that we don't have as the backing, which is the most important piece for a backing, is the people. Now, it lies with the Constitution, like you mentioned, where majority of our people do not know what the Constitution is, do not know how important the Constitution is. How do we get our people to back this up? It is important. I'll tell you why. We're seeing now the imbalances that's going on, which brings to the people, it's not fair to the people. How can we get this to be fair for the people, besides the fact that we go into court and then yes, court says this is what we have to do because this is the Constitution, and then we put things into places. Primary, the people must understand. How do we make this happen?
Well, I'm very glad that you touched on that, because in terms of advocacy, right, that's where the Belize Peace Movement is so critical. You see, and I'm very glad you gave us the opportunity from the onset to set the tone in terms of what exactly the Belize Peace Movement is. Because there are some media houses out there that like to confound it and say, oh, it's a political party, or they like to mention a political party along with it. The Belize Peace Movement is a registered civil society organization. The Companies Act, correct? We have our documents, our paperwork in that regard. Mm-hmm. And based on that, to directly answer your question, it ties into the need to create awareness through education for the people with regards to these constitutional issues. Mm-hmm. So, and that's where the Belize Peace Movement is the ideal vehicle, because it's not a political organization, it's a civil society organization, whereby we're not coming with a political agenda, right? We're not saying, oh, we're doing this because we want to get in or anything like that. We're doing this because this is for the benefit of the nation. Mm-hmm. Irrespective of the fact that it will change certain dynamics, what we're looking for is adherence to the rule of law. And with regards to civil society, you have the education, awareness, you have campaigning and lobbying. And those are the steps that we have to take with regards to getting things of this nature done. Yeah. This is not the only issue out there. Mm-hmm. This is just but one. Mm-hmm. Excuse me.
I'm trying to understand. It's an interesting political climate at this time, and, mm-hmm. and I think that we heard from the Attorney General at the end of last year, which is just last week, where it is very clear, and he said it very clearly, it's not on the government's agenda, we'll see what the court says. So what we're hearing immediately is the pushback saying, we have no interest in doing this at this time. What are you hoping? Is it simply to bring the issue to the forefront, that it is kind of accepted by the people as something that we see need to be done? Or are you hoping to take this all the way through to as high a court as possible?
All the way through.
Absolutely.
All the way through.
Mm-hmm. And I think when I heard the Attorney General, I was like, man, he just...
He was very matter of fact.
This is the kind of mindset that have us exactly where we are.
Precisely.
Belize is not where it should be. 38 years after our independence, we're not where we should be. Mm-hmm. And it is precisely because of these kinds of leaders and the kind of mindset that they have that keep us stagnated. Mm-hmm. The Belizean people have to understand that a lot of the challenges and problems that we have stems from our political leadership. And until we fix that, this is not going to change, it's going to get worse. We look at the economy right now, the economy has stalled. You look at crime is completely out of hand now, where the police are trying to impose draconian measures upon the Belizean people. Mm. You go to the Carl Hushner Memorial Hospital, the building is collapsing. It would take 25 million, for example, to put Carl Hushner in a good place. Mm-hmm. 25 million, We owe almost $3.something billion. Wow. So we can't, as a people, continue with this, way I call this fire and forget mentality when it comes to political leadership. We go to elections, some we collect, we leave 50 and we leave 100, we vote and we walk away. We can't continue like that. You have to remain engaged. This is our country, and unless we put in the effort to keep an eye on our political leadership, this is not going to get better. Yeah. So when I heard the Attorney General say, the government has no intention of doing that at this time. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't care where you got to say better. The Constitution is clear. You have a duty to do it. Correct. And if you don't want to do it on your own, then we are going to find whatever means necessary to compel you to do it. Yeah. Right? And so we have to say, look, this is good for us. And I will say this to the Belizean people. Anytime a politician comes to your house, ask if you vote, you ask, especially if you are from a non-Belize City division, you ask them, my brother, why it take 4 of me if you make 1 out there, 1 over yonder? Ask them plain. And if they don't give you a good answer, vote for somebody else. Right? Because I tell you, nobody wants to touch it, neither the red nor the blue.
Hot potato.
Right? And I think it shows, to me, it shows extremely poor leadership that we know that this is right, but because it is politically convenient for you, you ignore it. That is not leadership to me.
Yeah.
Now, the Constitution does, and this I would imagine is part of what may be mentioned as why redistricting hasn't taken place, but it also talks about looking at some of the accessibility issues and the features itself of the areas, how you have access to a particular point. Have you taken a look at this specific point? I'm sure this is what they'll come back and say, well, you know, it's based on the transport that people have to these particular areas and accessibility in these areas.
Well, actually, it's very good that you bring that up, because I think that underscores the importance as to why we're doing what we're doing. My colleague, Will Mejia, down in Punta Gorda, he always talks about the issue of access, right? Individuals in rural areas that don't have access to make it to the polling stations and whatnot. And that just underscores the fact that this needs to be done. It has to be done. And as Major Jones said, politicians will do what is politically expedient for them, right? And I think that after 38 years of independence, Belizeans have to accept the responsibility that we cannot rely on the good graces of politicians to have an epiphany and say, okay, we're going to do the right thing today. It's not going to happen. And the judiciary, or taking legal steps, legal means, is the, how can I put it? It's the way that we can buttress this situation. It's the legal means through which to hold those who are vested with the ultimate responsibility of doing what's in the best interest of our country accountable. And that's the reason why we have to go through this process as ever long as it takes.
Well, you see, the logistics of it, I think, would make the argument for smaller divisions in the rural areas and larger divisions in Belize City. Because, for example, you could walk to, anybody in Belize City can walk, except for Freetown, which is, I think, goes across the bridge, right? But just about every division, you could walk to your polling station. But in rural north, for example, you have to go several miles to get to a polling station. So you could understand why those divisions, geographically, they're spread out. So we have 2,000 people here. But Belize City, that's concentrated. Why you have 2,000 people here when they can walk? So that the Constitution says, when you redistrict, when you carve out these divisions, you should take into consideration transportation, logistics, etc. So it makes the argument for smaller divisions in the rural areas as opposed to Belize City. But we have it the reverse. We have small divisions in Belize City and then huge divisions in the rural areas where you have to move people several miles just to get them to a polling station. And I think, again, that's unfair, because what happens now is that when people are far from polling stations, they are less likely to go and vote unless a politician comes for them. As opposed to Belize City, I don't need nobody to come pick me up. I could walk to my polling station. But if you are 5 miles from your polling station, election day, you're not going to go vote, man. But a politician knock for your door, right? And I say, come carry go vote, right? And so this is the kind of challenges that I think we have to look at seriously as a people, and appreciate that the political power belongs to the people. We entrust you to go and represent us, but the political power is ours, and you can't dilute my political power and concentrate Marlene's. That's unfair to me.
And just to be clear, because you made the case for smaller divisions in the rural division, that's not what a redistricting exercise would allow for. It says nearly as equal as possible, which means if we look at what the current registration numbers are, I think after the re-registration exercise, it was somewhere around
155,000 plus.
Okay, so that's what we're, and as equal as possible as you can do them based on where people live. That's what you would work towards. What would be the process? How would it happen? There's no of a redistricting exercise. What does the law stipulate?
Well, it's entirely up to the Elections and Boundaries Commission to examine it and to make the recommendation to Parliament. And then on the Elections and Boundaries Commission are the two major political parties, because there are smaller parties who are not represented, and perhaps that might be a next issue that we need to look at, to say that if the two parties control the Elections and Boundaries Commission, this is precisely why we have the kind of mischief that we have now. Maybe we need to look at the composition of the Elections and Boundaries Commission. But really it is for them to look at where the voters are and bearing in mind the spatial arrangements, transportation, logistics issues, and then decide, okay, this will constitute a division, this would constitute a division, etc., etc., and then make that recommendation to Parliament, who must then take it to the House and approve for those for that redistricting.
And the bottom line is that empirically, it can be done. I mean, there's no question. The numbers are there. It can be done, but as Major Jones said, it's up to the Elections and Boundaries Commission to devise how exactly it shall be done.
Yeah. And in terms of what type of resources it would take?
To me, it's a very simple exercise. It's to look at the numbers and to say, okay, this constitutes a division, and that's it. And the only requirement would be that to say, because remember now, you don't need to, what I imagine what they were saying is that if you create a new division, I was once in Rural Central, now I am in Rural North, for example, right? And I think they're probably thinking, well, if you do that, now people will have to re-register again, or how will it work? You understand me? To say, well, and I think to me, you could go simply by address. It's a very simple exercise. If you live at if you live on Kelly Street is no longer in
that's Freetown.
Freetown. It is now in Pickstock.
Pickstock, yeah.
So don't go to vote over there. Go and vote.
Over this
that can be, in my mind, it can be a paper exercise, and simply to inform people.
It definitely can be done. There's no doubt about it. It can be done. But is the will there to do it?
Yeah. And since you have taken on this cause, what's the response you're getting from people? I know when you were taking up the position of a no in the referendum vote, you built some support base there. Have you been building a support base in moving towards a redistricting in Belize?
I can say from personal experience that a lot of the feedback that I've gotten is very positive. And it's quite interesting because it comes from people with different political affiliations.
Yeah, okay.
You have people that support the government that say, yeah, boy, this thing needs to be done. We really appreciate what you all are doing, stepping forward to do it. You have people from that support the opposition, and people from alternative political persuasions, as well as people that are not political whatsoever, that just realize that this is a national issue and that Belizeans need to be afforded equal opportunity with regards to their vote. So we're building momentum. We're getting a very, very positive response. And as you mentioned, John, it ties into the awareness, attuning the people as to what the law says and what are our rights as Belizeans.
Yeah. I mean, it's as simple as what you said. It's looking at the power of my vote. It looks at, because it's called a representative for a reason. You represent me as an area representative, and when you go into Parliament, you represent my interest. And it has been for an issue that has been discussed many times, but it is going to take political will, and since that hasn't been sufficient up to this time, you are taking it through the court system. You are heading back to the courts this month? Next month?
Next month.
All right. And where are we in this process? What is your attorney saying at this point?
Well, we're feeling positive about it. It's moving forward. We just have to go through the process. That's basically it.
And how do you explain this issue about its importance to just the everyday man who looks at you and says, "What in your court for now?"
Yeah.
Well, like what I say, when Christmas cheer come, 7,000 people get $40,000. And 2,000 people get $40,000. Divide that and you see how much you get compared to the one over there.
Yeah.
Right?
Simple maths.
Straight up. That's how it works, and it happens with everything. And I think this is a very important thing, because if we had, and a number of people are talking about this right now, about looking at our political system, and perhaps we have to go to proportional representation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If we go that direction, then the numbers don't matter so much, because you look at, okay, 7,000 compared to 2,000, and it's balanced, right? So you give per capita, for example. So if the Prime Minister had said $1 million divided by 155,000 voters, and then you get your, depending upon the number of voters you have, it wouldn't have been a problem. But that's not how it works. You the one seat, and you the one seat, and that's it. You see? No matter how much voters put you there, you the one seat, one vote. And I think that is the problem. And so the average person have to understand that it can't be correct for somebody to have more power than you politically. Right? And I think a lot of people know, we still don't understand that really this is for we power, You go and vote and say, I put you there, Paco, for do, as Marlene said, if you look after my interests.
Yeah.
Correct.
And then we vote for Paco and Paco turn King Power and we can't talk to Paco afterwards. What kind of nonsense this?
Happen all the time.
I always tell people, I have the highest ranking in this country, not the Prime Minister, I had a citizen.
Yeah.
That's the highest ranking in this country. We appoint or elect rather the people in Belmopan, but they're not senior man.
The people give you a job.
Yes.
Correct.
The one job they got and you have to hold them accountable.
All right.
That's why I was getting in trouble too.
Well, we'll keep on following the case, and we do appreciate you coming in to kind of just give us an idea of the work you've been doing and why it has become such a critical point for the Belize Peace Movement. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much
Much
for having
appreciated.
us.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. We are going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, what's your professional profile looking like online and how can you improve it? We're going to get some tips in our second segment with a digital marketing strategist, so please stay tuned.